All right, good afternoon. Shiur today has been given during the Zman, the Seder of learning Ribbis Le'iyun. So, Mamela has passed us that the Shiur itself should be on Ribbis. So I want to talk about the Shaila that came up that actually has to do directly with being in Kolel, how being in Kolel could perhaps lead someone to a question of Ribbis. Not that, because no one owes anyone anything, as we'll see in a moment. So, the Shaila appears in the Shaila Teshuvas Har Tzvi by the guy in the Tzvi Pesach Frank, who's one of the Choshev Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael around when the Medina became the Medina. He passed away in Tafshin Chaf Aleph. Before we continue, of course, you always like to find what's the connection to us. So, for example, when the Rebbe was very involved in the parsha of the ships on Shabbos, fighting that the Israeli ships on Shabbos are a problem, other Rabbanim were not so sure, or they thought it might be okay. So, we know the Rebbe was leading that battle. So, in Igros Kodesh Chelik Yud Gimel, there's a letter from Elo Tavshin Tezayin to Shlomo Yosef Zevin. And in the middle, the Rebbe writes, Derech Agav, Ashluchim, Ha'avrechem Shlita, of course referring to the group of Bachrim that the Rebbe sent to Eretz Yisrael, then right after the murder by the terrorists in Kfar Chabad. And in fact, it is mentioned, we do have the Yeman of their trip, they also mentioned this. So they reported back to the Rebbe that had a Frank Sheikh, they visited him, and they were talking to him about this, and he said, they're telling him the Rebbe has letters, the Rebbe is an expert, the Rebbe has letters. So Frank said, I haven't seen the letters. He doesn't know exactly what steht dort. Even though it sounds generally like Frank is more pro the Rebbe's position. So he says, that's why I'm asking that you get my letters for Frank's, for he should be able to look at it as soon as possible. And there are additional details relating to the Rebbe and his involvement in this parsha, but we're not getting into that now. So, with that aside, so in Shalas Teshuvas Har Tzvi Yededeya Siman Kuf Lamed Beis, he asks, the question is there Ribbis in Shtaris Shel Kolel? Before we get to the question, just a little background, right? So the Teshuva is talking about Kolelim as they were set up in Eretz Yisrael at the time. So what exactly are the Kolelim? So we know B'chlalos over the generations, there was always a very small group of Yidden that always maintained a presence in Eretz Yisrael. As late as the 1800s, before Zionism, 85% of the Goyim in Israel, people in Israel, were Muslims. It was about hundreds of thousands of people were Muslims. About 5% were Jews, about a few thousand people. And then as when Zionism kicked in, so then the numbers started shifting. So there's always a very small presence in Eretz Yisrael. For whatever reason, this never was really much of a financial basis to the community there. They couldn't really support themselves. So for hundreds of years, they used to say in the Shadar, originally back in the day, 1700s, they used to say, Mamish, the Chashav Tzirei Rabbanim, the Chidol Mashal, was a Shadar in this Misgaret, etc. So they used to travel to the lands of the Sfardim, the lands of the Ashkenazim. In Ashkenaz in particular, you only really move to Eretz Yisrael, mamish, for ruchnistic reasons. It's not like the people who live nearby that moved in and out. You're going specially for ruchnis. And then in the 1700s, we see there were a number of organized aliyahs for this purpose. And the most famous one for our purposes is the aliyah, the Talmidei HaMagid, led by the Mendel of Vitebsk. And we know that Rebbe almost joined them. Ultimately, the Alter Rebbe remained behind, and that is how he became the manhig of the Chassidim in White Russia, and the rest is history. So that's when we start seeing this new phenomenon, that there's a particular group in Eretz Yisrael supported by a particular group back home. They're supporting each other. So like the Alter Rebbe started raising money, started fundraising, specifically for this group of Chassidim, as we see throughout the Igros Kodesh and Tanya, where you see the Igros that Alter Rebbe wrote that have a Chassidus Teichen, and then of course there are additional Igros that are just relating to the technical aspects of raising the money, sending the money, which those who are the historians can like to get into the details of. As we know, as time went on, Avram Kalisker got into a dispute with Alter Rebbe. He was the Manig in Eretz Yisrael after the passing of Mendel of Vitebsk. And we know from different letters about this as well. And so maybe for the first time in history, there was a clear pro-Chabad camp and an anti-Chabad camp in Eretz Yisrael. And that spread back to Chutz La'aretz. So now you had a pro-Chabad camp. The Alter Rebbe was raising money for those in Eretz Yisrael who are in his camp. And then from Kalaska in Eretz Yisrael, he started arranging his own fundraising system involving other Chassidish tzaddikim that were more in line with his hashkafas, and they were raising money for them. So once that happened, as time went on, more and more groups from different countries started appearing in Eretz Yisrael, and also coming up with this kind of system. Different countries in Eastern Europe. So you have more and more of these organizations, and they then split, and then you have multiple such organizations. So all these organizations are referred to by the name Kolel. Kolelim. So that's why you have Kolel Chabad, which is the Alter Rebbe's Meisid, Kolel Varsha, Kolel Ungarin. If you're familiar a little bit, you've heard of these Kolelim. At one point, there was even something called Kolel America. My understanding is that the word kollel be'etzem is like a archaic word for what we call today a vad, and you're going an organization. Those words only became popular later, and before that, the word was kollel. So,
all those kollels exist today?
Some of them to some extent. The ones who are anti-Zionist, they're still part of Kolel Shemri HaChaimis, which is the continuation of Kolel Ungarin. There are moistus called Batei Varsha, real estate is called Batei Varsha that belong to Kolel Varsha. I think Ger controls that. It's different. There's still, if you follow the news, you will see sometimes how that's it's still ongoing to some extent. Chabad, of course, still exists in some format. Right. So the word kollel just seems to mean an organization. It's the kollel, it's the organization of these people, But of course, ultimately it was to support basically people who are sitting and learning in Eretz Yisrael. Then, as time went on, the word kollel seems to have come to mean what it means today, which is any group of people that are sitting and learning and being supported in some way. Already in the end of the 1800s, we find already in Europe, in Litta, that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter opened the Kolel Kovna, which is already seems to be closer in line to the concept we have today of a group of young light in a city that are learning and being supported by the people there. And then ultimately, of course, history culminates in the Kolel Lahira Maisis, which we are in today, right? Okay. So, what was the Seder then? The Seder was that often there were delays in the money reaching Eretz Yisrael on time to be distributed by the local Kolel. So, that created a problem. So, what ended up happening is that they started creating documents to trade in that corresponded to the value that was expected to come in the next delivery. So Rabbi Pesach Frank says, I was asked about the Shtaris HaKolelim. It's already a thing here in Yerushalayim, that it's actually signed even by the Memunim of the Kolel. Every Yachid in the Kolel gets a shtar signed by the Memuna. Instead of money, right, you come, there's no money yet. Okay, so let's create a shtar for you instead. So the way it's written is that first of all, the Baal HaShtar, seeing the Chaver HaKolel himself, who's supposed to get the money. So first of all, he writes his chayvus, that whoever is Moisek Savzeh, whoever has the shtar, now gets this and this amount, because he gets that part of the chalukah, and the date was going to be this and this day when the money is expected to come, and the apetiki is the portion of the money that's supposed to come, meaning apetiki is when you don't want to create a shibud over all the nechasim, so the apetiki is the shibud to a specific neches. So here, the Chaver HaKolel is promising the money, and the apetiki is the money that the Kolel is going to get shortly. And he's giving the shus to the Memunim to pay out directly to whoever shows up with the shtar, even if they don't have to contact him anymore, they don't need to confirm with him, because he was mevater, he has no control anymore. So that's his part. And then also the Memunim, they also signed that yes, they are fully on board with this, and they will respect this agreement. Whoever brings the shtar will get that chelek when it's time to collect. Money will be set aside, and it's not like they only know who the Chaver HaKolel is. And if he doesn't come, then the money's going to disappear. No, they're fully cooperating here. The money will be waiting for whoever brings the shtar. So that, what's the te'elis? The te'elis is that you can get cash right now. You don't have to wait till the money actually comes. So these shtaris mamish became oiver la seicher. It was, they were trading it openly. And the way, of course, it always works. The reason why it's worth it is you always buy the shtar for less than the amount in the shtar. And the person buying it is going to have to wait, and in exchange for waiting, he's going to get more. So seemingly, there's not an issue of a risk. It seems like the money was pretty much guaranteed, but it's the hamtana, right? The meicher doesn't want to wait, and he's willing to lose, and the kohen is willing to wait and to earn. So what's the problem? Tzvi Pesach says, "L'chayra, is this chashash isur ribbis?" Because ultimately, what's happening here? The meicher, the kohen paid, let's say, l'dugma, he gave $100, whatever the currency is. He gave 100, and then ultimately he's going to collect 120. Says, there's a Yushalmi that's quoted in the Svarim, the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, Yeridea, Siman Kovayin Gimel, Sif Dalet, if you want to look it up. So the way it's quoted, not in Shulchan Aruch, but in the early Merkaitis in the Yushalmi, Yesh Dvarim Shehen K'may Ribbis Umutarim. There are things that are like Ribbis but are allowed. Ketzal Lekeach Adam Shtaris of Shalchavere Bepachas Veine Chayshish. It says clearly you can buy the shtar from your friend for less, and it's not a problem. You look in the Shulchan Aruch there in Kofayin Gimel Dalet, Mishish, the shtar Chev al Chavere, Oimil Val Peh, Mutter L'machrim La'achar B'pachas, Afilu Lahigi Mana Peroin, Ve'en B'mishum Ribbis. Okay, so it sounds like it's easy, straightforward. But if you look in the Shach there, Sifkot and Ches, which you can look up as well, quotes from the Agoyes Ashri, that the Malva has to be, we're talking about selling a chayv there. So the malva, who's now selling it, has to be misalik himself, remove himself completely from the chayv. And there has to be b'mayim shlashton, they all have to be there involved. So it'll be a very serious kinyan. So it seems like it's very important that it should mamish be a mechira. And then it's like selling any other asset that accrues value later.
You want to explain again how it's
In the din or in the case? Case, the person in the kollel knows he's getting money at the end of the month, at the end of a few months, he can't wait, so he makes a shtar, everyone signs the munim, they all agree that he's going to sell his chelek in the chalukah to someone else. He'll get cash now. The cash he's getting now is less than what he's supposed to get, and then the person who bought it makes a profit when the money for the chalukah finally comes. So the Chayr and Shulchan Aruch talks about the idea of selling a shtar chayv. But the Shach said, that a mamash has to be a full-fledged kinyan. Why? Because then you're talking selling an asset, and then the asset gain value. But what you want to avoid is that what essentially might be happening here is that the kohen really all he did was he lent money. He lent $100 now to the meicher, who's the.
What did he say? He said, "Oh, he said here." Depends on what he
So
said.
the Shach said, no. The Shach said you have to do a kinyan b'mayim shlashtam.
No, I'm saying he didn't say
You could say whatever you want, but the Poyel Mamish, what happened here is he gave him $100, and
he gave him on trust, he sold like a cheaper, what do you call it?
who decides if it was a sale or a loan? So we have to come up with a system to decide whether it's a sale or a loan. And we're saying that the way to decide is if there's talk, at least according to the Shach Gais Ashri, that there has to be a Kinyam Amayim Shlashtan. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that essentially you lent $100, and then stuff happened, and then the guy returned $120. So why shouldn't? So I was there. What's the problem here? Maybe you can also say that here it's also a sale. Problem here is that there's a unique problem here. Tzvi Pesach says you can't say in these shtaris that you're being moicher the shibud, right? Because the whole idea is that the moicher, the middle person is supposed to get completely out of the picture. He's not supposed to be involved anymore. And now the kohen has direct shibud to the source of the money. He'll deal directly with that. But you can't say that here. Why not? He says the Baal Ashtar himself, who's selling his chelek, he doesn't have anything here himself until the money reaches from Chutz La'aretz to the Memunim. Now it's a Dover Shaloi Bolo Olam. The money B'chlal isn't here. The money doesn't exist yet. So Amela, it's not something you could sell. It's not potatoes kinyan. So if there's an absence of a kinyan here, if a kinyan is not possible here, then we're left with a halva ad zman haperoid. Right? So the kollel seemingly is not really responsible to pay anyone anything. There's no etzem shibud is chayvus existing right now till the money comes. Apparently there's no chayv that you can point at. Mamish, there's an understanding that as long as the kollel functions, and they're gonna pay the money that they promised. But there's no shibud here yet. So Mamela, there's no money, there's nothing here to sell until the money mamish comes with poil mamish. Until then, there's nothing shubut for to sell. So bazoi, this whole shtar and this whole mechira are essentially fictitious. Nothing exists, nothing was sold, nothing was bought. So bazoi, again, we're left just with a halva. He lent 100 and he got 120 back. So it's Isser Ribbis. And Tzvi Pesach says this is not just a chashash that I just made up right now. It's actually a mefurish maharit. It's the Margilian Marsha is a Shleim Eger's Mitzayin there in Yeridea to this maharit about an earlier period in the history of Yerushalayim, the way things worked then. So we're going to look directly in the maharit and we'll see how things work. So the maharit, of course, is Rabbi Yosef Mitrani, the son of the Mabit. And interestingly, as I was putting this together, I saw that his yard site is given as Yud Dalet Tammuz Shin Tzaddik Tes. I didn't look up who the yard sites were for today and then work backwards. It came across it. So the Shut Ma'arit Chelik Beis Eridei Simla Mates says that back then the Memunim themselves of Yerushalayim were in a tight space. They themselves were waiting for the money before they were kollel. They themselves needed the money, and they were borrowing Ribbis. They were borrowing and Pashut paying back kach lameh for every 100. They were paying a percentage of Ribbis.
Who are they borrowing from?
People with money.
Okay.
No, Yidden with money. So whoever it was who wrote to the Maharit said he finds it very surprising, and the Maharit says, "I agree. Gam be'ena yipolei v'ra alai hamaisa." So first we're going to first bring the first section, which is a really slightly different Nakuda, but also has to do with stock and Ribbis. So he says maybe the Parnasim got the idea that it's not for us, it's for the Kol, it's for the Aniyim, Talmid Chachamim generally. And we have a Rashba that said the opposite, where you have Moyesh Shel Aniyim and you want to make money for the Moyesh Shel Aniyim. So the question is whether you can lend the Moyesh Shel Aniyim to make a profit with the Ribbis. So the Rashba is the one who said that it might be okay, and then he added a line that Mois Elu Ein Lehem Bailim Yeduim. Essentially, no one owns this money that belongs to Hekdesh Aniyim, and the Gizbar who's doing the transaction, it's not his own money; it's no one's money. It's brought in here today as Siman Kuf Samach Seif Yud Ches, you may recall in Shulchan Aruch. So maybe the people in Yerushalayim want to be lumay davar midavar. If you could take the money of Aniyim and lend it to make money, because there's no bailam you're doing, and that way the Aniyim will earn Ribbis. So maybe you could also do the opposite. You'll borrow money letzarkan, and the Aniyim will pay Ribbis. There's no bailam. It has to be where we're going to say that the Torah only answers if it comes miloiva lamalva miyuchad. But Marit says there's no sad here at all. First of all, the Rashba himself was only lahalocha, not lamaisa. So then how are you going to start applying that practically? And he says, anyway, where did you get this idea from that Ribbis, you need bailam, you do him? He brings an interesting raya, among other things, he brings an interesting raya from the beginning of Ezu Nashach. The Gemara says, normally the cost of Rahman, Allah b'Ribbis, Allah b'Gezel, Allah b'Hina, there's a tzrichusa for each one. So at the end it says we don't need a law for Gezel because there's a matzad from Ribbis and Haino. So why do we need a law for Gezel? So where it says it's a shtickle deichik. It's for a kovish schar sachir, the guy who doesn't pay the salary. So he's going to be over on two lavim now, the Gezel. So he says, but when it says if it's true that the Torah only asks the bailim yedumim yuchadim, so that's unique to Ribbis, but that's not true by Gezel. So then you would need a law by Gezel to tell you that you're even chayev, unlike by Ribbis, where without bailim yedumim it's fine. By Gezel, without bailim yedumim you're still chayev. Because Gezel dir Rabbim, if you steal from a Rabbim is Gezel, and the Rabbim shagazlu are also called kazlanim, brings an eye to that. So, why are we using the law for Gezel for kovish schar sacher, which Bechlal is the rule in Shas is that if you have another drasha, you shouldn't just pile up the lavim for something. So that's the raya he brings from the Shakam of the Gemara. So he says, I believe that Ashba never said it, except in cases where the aniyim mamish, none of the money is earmarked for a particular ani. So then there's mamin she'ein le toivim. No one can come and say, "Give me my money." It's that in that case, it's mamish. No one can claim it. But in the case where the aniyim are getting a set amount, so then it's a mamin she'ein le toivim. But if it's taka ein le toivim, the ani comes and you say, "No, I'm not giving it to you. so then it's not chashiv mammon l'inyan. If it's va'af loy l'inyan gezel, then in that case, taka, gezel isn't really apply here as well. And he brings a raya that it says that if you're mazik matnas kahuna, right, a kohen's supposed to get matnas kahuna. So if you're mazik it or you eat it, you're potter. You don't have to pay the kohen. And the Gemara says why? And one of the reasons the Gemara says is that it's a mammon she'ein le'toivim. No particular kohen owns the matnas kahuna. So can't sue me. Who's going to sue me? No one has a claim. Agav, I was asked to speak on one of the Siyumei Harambam the other week. So I mentioned, among other things, that there's the tshuva and Shalos tshuva's afkas reichel, race of karo. The tshuva itself is from someone else, but the discussion is about the mystery as to why we're not mekayim the mitzvah of matnas kahuna b'zman hazeh, b'furish in the Rambam, that it's noyeg b'chol zman b'chol makom. So why does no one do it? Not in Eretz Yisrael, not here. So this tshuva is trying to argue that it's all one big mistake, and mitaka have to do it. So among other things, right, maybe as a theory as to why it fell out of practice, he says because it's a moment she'ein le'toivim, no one kohen can come and say, "Give me my matnas kahuna." So mamela, no kohen came to ask for it, and then the person never gave it, and then as time went on, gvar nois. Anyway, so that's the vart taka. So we see there's no gezel by moment she'ein le'toivim. So he says. Then, according to this, you won't need a tzrichas special limud for gezel because the din is taka the same for both. So, poel mamish. So he says, if there are aniyim that get a set amount, like Talmid Chacham that get a weekly stipend, or the Talmidim, the Talmud Torah, or the Malamdim, and the aniyim, they always get meals every day, whatever it was that the Memunim Yerushalayim were responsible for at the time of the Ma'aret. So, it is a moment she'eshli toivim, and there are bailim. So, you can't. The Rashba's idea doesn't apply here because it's not the same thing. It says, in any way, besides that, really, all the Bnei Ha'ir are the bailim here. It doesn't belongs to nobody; it belongs to everybody, because the mammon from Chutz La'aretz is for tzarchi Ha'ir, and they spend money. Maybe they owe the goyim money, then they have to pay them back with this money. Otherwise, they'd have to pay on their own. So it's really their money. They already have credit, and they have to pay back. And he says, even if there's non-earmarked money, where it's for aniyim, Talmid Chacham generally, but not for anyone in particular, but you give whatever it is to them, and then the rest goes to tzarchi ha'ir. So when you're paying the Ribbis, when you're paying a certain percentage to the malva, that money, if you wouldn't pay it for Ribbis, would have been, that's not the money that goes to the aniyim that wasn't earmarked. That's the money that was left over to tzarchi ha'ir. So that money would have gone to the ear. So that proves that the money is all, the bailam are the ear, the whole city are the bailam of this, is for the tzarchi ha'ir, if the money wouldn't have gone to Ribbis. So everyone is a loiva here, or a malva here. Everyone here is a loiva through the tuvi ha'ir, who are the shluchim, etc., and they're the ones paying back. So Ribbis ksutza miloiva lamalva. In Inyan, there are also letters from Al Rebbe about something somewhat related, which is that those collecting money for Kolel Chabad in Chutz La'aretz, they thought that while they're waiting to send the money, they'll make a gmach, they'll lend money to people locally. Problem is, of course, that gmachs don't usually get all their money back. So the Kolel Chabad was losing money or was getting delayed. And the way the Alter Rebbe describes it, it's mamish b'koach nefesh in Eretz Yisrael if the right amount of money doesn't come on time. So the Alter Rebbe was writing very sharp to stop it. Somewhat related. Now, continuing the Ma'arit to the part that's negate to what we're discussing here. So you said, you gave me another possibility. You wrote that what if we make it that the malvim, the people lending money to the Memunim in Yerushalayim, to the Parnasim, what if we make it that they're already koiner the money that's going to come from Chutz La'aretz? So this is already more or less this idea that they're being koiner the future money, so it's a mecher. I bought the money for later, 120 from later for 100 now. So it says, first of all, if it was taka derech harayis, meaning if the money gets lost now on the way, then they taka say, okay, I took a loss, the Yerushalayim doesn't owe me money anymore. Then we have what to talk about, because then you're taka treating it like a mecher. Now it's your property out there. But the reality is that they are always running to the Memunim to pay the Ribbis midei chodesh b'chodshei, right? The Karen, whenever, but every month they're coming to get the Ribbis. And sometimes if they can't find it, they take money from somewhere else. They're very much dedicated to getting the money directly from the Memunim, even if it's some other money. So, Avadei Aser. And then, he says, I'm going to add to what you said, that even if we say they were Mekabel Achrayis, and they're not going to harass the Memunim anymore, you still can't make this tonight. The ein kan mecher, the davar shaloi bala oilamhu. Here's where he mentions this idea. So the call doesn't have the money to sell it. Once they have it, that's when they're going to get it, and then they're just paying back a loan. And the Yerushalmi, this idea is only when there's ksiva, mesira, lekicha, it's a full kinyan, not sagoy sashri. But where there's no kinyan, it's not a mecher but a malva. So Mamela, what you have here is nothing more than agar nata. So that's the marit. So back to the Tzvi Pesach. In this case, also we have a problem. Marit isn't the only say on this matter. We also have the Machne Ephraim Navon. So there's Simon Lamed Gimel. He also gets into this. He mentions that V'loi Zochar es Yosef. He doesn't mention Marit Bechlal, Marit's opinion at all. But Menachem Ephraim wants to say that it's fine. So let's take a look also in the Menachem Ephraim directly. Menachem Ephraim is talking about a case. Reuven sold Shimon a star that he had for a guy. And he just gave the star to Shimon. Fine, now you have the star, now you go collect it. But they didn't do an additional star hakna, a star that says, I'm hereby giving you that other star. So can Shimon Taka go and get the ribbis from the guy? Or was there really no kinyan here? So Mela, all Shimon did was give alva to Reuven, and the guy is paying back Reuven, and Reuven's paying back Shimon, then he's paying ribbis to Shimon. Right, the same idea. If there's no mecher, it's alva, and here they didn't really try to make a mecher. So this actually connects to now what we're learning Kuf Samach Ches, Kuf Samach Tes. So there's in Sif Yud Ches and Shulchan Aruch. So there's a case of a mashkin shel goy b'yad Yisrael, and now the Yid is taking the mashkin to Yisrael Chaveiroi, so he should loan him money. And when the guy comes to reclaim the mashkin, he'll pay, the ribbis will go to him. So also it's the same discussion here essentially. Are you able to be Meicher and be makna the chayiv here? Now the guy in the middle is not involved anymore, or he is still involved, and it's going through him, and it's ribbis. So the Torah writes, B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam, that it's okay as long as he says Hareini Meichel Kol Kayach L'Schus V'Shibud Sheyesh Li Al HaMashken. So he's not involved anymore. But he says to the Mordechai that from the Maram it seems that the kinyan did not work. So Mamela, the ribbis is all flowing straight through the guy in the middle to the Malva, to the guy who got the mashkin ultimately, and it's awesome. So Bazai, what's the reason? The chayre, the vart is that en Yisrael migoy Yisrael kani mashkin. There's no kinyan here to begin with. And the original mashkin, so Mamela, if you weren't kayna to begin with, you can't be making it to the next person either. So this idea, but there's no kinyan is impossible, it remains halva. And Rabbeinu Tam holds that even though the original Yid couldn't be kind of the mashkin from the guy, he can still be marking it to the next person. Why? Because he has a certain shibud. The guy owes him money, and there's a certain shibud here. He can sell that shibud, and that's Rabbeinu Tam's shita b'chlal. He holds mechira shtaris da'iraisa, that if I have a shibud and something else, I can be marking it to the next person. That's the unique shita of Rabbeinu Tam. But many disagree and say that mechira shtaris is the rabbanon, because the Malva doesn't have anything right now. It's not really an asset. Balchayv is only Goyva Mikan Lahaba, in the same way you can't be makdash it and say, the thing that I have a shibud and is hekdash now, so then why should I be able to be makdash to someone else? The same thing. And so for this reason, the Rosh holds that you can't be meshabed your shtari chayv. If you can't count your debts that people owe you as an asset, for your own debts. Now, the Menachem Ephraim says that no, that's not exactly what's going on here in Siman Kuf Samach Ches Kuf Samach Tes. Those disagree with Rabbeinu Tam disagree for another reason. Not that there's ribbis because there's no haknoises. If you look in the Maharam, it says it's not ribbis. The Maharam himself writes, literally the enkan is ribbis, the haleka halva, the lav agar natar lihu, sharei loy kibal achrayas. Says that the guy in the middle is not achrei anymore. Only the guy is achrei. So the money that's coming to the kaina, the guy who got the final malva, the final guy, when he's getting the money, it's not all to toive for agar natar, for hamtanas hamois of the middle guy, because the middle guy is not involved anymore. He doesn't need a toive. He's not responsible. So what's the problem here? It's Pashat Mishum Gezel, because since there was no real transfer of the chayiv, so Mamela, you were never koine the Ribbis. So Mamela, the Meicher only thought he was being makne you the chayiv of the Ribbis, and Mamela, that's how the Ribbis is going to get to you. But if the Meicher knew that this whole thing didn't really work up halacha, and he's only giving him the extra at the end, he would never be Meichel. So it's Pashat Gazel. And in this gufa, not like Rabbi Tam, but in this gufa, those who disagree and say, no, once you agree, once you have an agreement, Paral Mamish, the middle guy, even if he could technically change his mind, he's still going to want to be known as honest. So in Mela, we can assume that it's a done deal. So Machan Ephraim says, what do we see from here? That if you sell something to your chaver, even if there was no kinyan, whether because it's machmas shu davar shlei bal olam, so that's one thing he mentions clearly, or it's a chayv of a guy where it's hard to be makna things, or it's a milval pev yid. As long as you were able to give the achrayas to lekeach, and the middle guy is not responsible anymore, you can't come to him anymore to claim from him. Ein b'zeh shum ribbis. So he seemingly clearly disagrees with the Marit. The Marit also made this point that if achrayas would wear elamai, he held there's no way to transfer the achrayas with davar shlei bal olam. And Machan Ephraim says no, davar shlei bal olam. As long as the lekeach has achrayas, it's now his loss, and it's fine. What about Rabbeinu Tam? It made it sound like you have to do more. What about in Siman Kufay and Gimel, the Hagoyas Ashri? He says, he thinks the Pshat in Shulchan Aruch is not like Hagoyas Ashri. According to Shulchan Aruch, all you need is Kabbalah Sachrayas. Hagoyas Ashri goes further. He gets into that to explain that. He says it's all to make sure that you're transferring the Achrayas to the Lekeach. But the goal is, ultimately, the only issue here is to get the achrayas to the lekeach. If you get the achrayas to the lekeach, according to the Machan Ephraim, even if there's no proper kinyan because it's a davar shlei bal olam, it works. The Har Tzvi gets a bit into his rayas. We're not going to get into that. So he says, we can say the same thing here. This mahalach, when we're selling the shtaris, milchatchila, their agreement, the understanding what the shtaris is, taka, that the guy in the middle is no longer involved. If the kollel is somehow not going to be able to follow through and pay or whatever, that's tough luck on the kollel of the shtar. It's not like the chaver kollel now is still responsible. It's taka the understanding that he's completely uninvolved. And the mamunim themselves are on board, and they're saying, yes, absolutely, we're going to give it directly to the Moisik Savzeh. You can come directly to us. We'll do it directly with you. Yiyah mishiyah. And even the Gaboy Kodesh, Michutz La'aretz, the ones bringing the money, it's also with the understanding that we'll give the money out to Lav Dafka, to the people on the list. It might end up going to other people. So Bazai, Har Tzvi says, Leis Dein Tzorich Baishish, that the Baal Hashtar Harishin never got the money. The money is not going to go through him. Once the money arrives and is given out, it's not like the money is going back through him, back up to the Kain and Bazai, it's Ribbis, 120 is going through him. It's very clear that it's not going through him. He was never Zeich Fakar, he was never Zeich in the Kasef. Great. So he's never Zeich ever. So he's not involved. The Munam was Zeich for the Maitzi Ashtar, so there's no Ribbis here from Leva to Malva. So the Machan Ephraim's idea that you don't need a Macher, just a Achrayas could work here.
Why would the
What? We didn't say, we're saying Taka that he's not.
And then they're paying it, and never pay it back.
Well, as we explained, technically there's no kinyan here. So, but we're saying that you're able to have this. We just have to clarify. This is how it works. This is and this is the decisive factor. He said, I found Taka Smach in the Birka Yosef because yeah.
They don't pay us if we come late. It shows that we don't.
So that's what I said in the beginning. He said, when he said right away about more or less, I said, technically, no one knows you anything until you get it. So, this question, the Marit, right? The Marit didn't like the fact that they were borrowing money, but Poyel Mamish, the Munim Yerushalayim kept on doing it, 1600s, 1700s. So we find in the Birka Yosef, the Chidah, in Siman Kuf Samach Tastaka, he quotes from a Sefer Shari Yeshua, which he quotes a lot. The Shari Yeshua was by someone by the name of Rabbi Yeshua Zain. He passed away in the year Tav Kuf. The Chidah quotes from Ksav Yad a lot throughout his Sefer. It was only printed in the last few decades. But this question, they're continuing to do it. So Rabbi Yeshua Zain, in Shari Yeshua, quoted by the Birka Yosef, says, that the Parnasim and the Manhigim, it's all miprit tzidkas achenu shebechutz laaretz. And achenu shebechutz laaretz are giving reshus to the memunim to borrow, and then it's like they're paying back on behalf of the memunim. The memunim are gonna borrow, and chutz laaretz is gonna pay back. So it's also the same idea, same concept that we're talking about here, where the middle guy borrows, and then the person who's giving the actual money is going to pay the full amount to the malva. And then he brings an ayah from the same shach there in Sim Kafayim Gimel Behamshach. It says weiter that but you have to do. What if the leiva is a goy? What are you going to do then? You can't do a kinyan. So he says, the Meicher tells the koine, I am really Meichel the whole debt to the guy. I'm not going to tell him. Trust me, I'm going to give it to you. I'm not going to keep it for myself. It's going to go to you. And now, I'm MS Potter from you. That's what it says there. So in that case, Take, with the Nachri, the whole problem was there was no Mechira. You can't do Mechira here. And the money is going to flow through the middle guy even, technically. But since he told them in advance, I'm not being zeich in it. I'm going to pick it up. Between me and you, we know the truth, that I have nothing to do with the guy anymore, and I'm just picking it up and I'm giving it to you. So it's like the guy in the middle is not in the middle. So Kol Shekain here with the study at Kolel, that the Malva is taka getting it directly from the Mamunim, and the guy in the middle is Bechla not involved at all. So it's even better than that case with the guy and the guy Sashri. Then he concludes that even the Marit will agree over here. Says, you could say that even the Ma'arit who says that you need to have Mechira and Dovid there's no Mechira, here is different. Because by now, these Shtaras HaKolim have become such a thing, and it's it's like a secondary market. It's a secondary market of Shtaras HaKolim. The Tagorim, the people in business are, even maybe reselling it. It's Mamish Over L'Seich Nikna Yad Liyad. So you could say that even it's a Dovid Shlei B'Lo'elam, but there's midin situmta, that it's the derech seichim to do this. That's enough of a kinyan. There's a shuvah Rabbi Kiva Eger based on early Mekaydas who argued that taka you can't have situmta Dovid Shlei B'Lo'elam, but there's a Ksam Sefer who proved that it does work. Now, of course, this is really a whole separate general discussion. There's different shittas. I found one article that actually deals directly in that question of Situmta V'Dover Shalei B'Lo'elam, and the way it concludes there is like this: that the Aruch HaShulchan brings brings the two days, and the Aruch HaShulchan writes, "Anu royim shenagu lahaknois kol minei chachiris ba'arendis." People used to lease something from the pirates, and then they would, again, a secondary market selling the lease. It's not for the shusai, and it's a davar shalom b'laylam, but the minute pashut is that the kinyan works. V'chein ikir l'dina, and quotes also Divrei Chaim, Har Tzvi, this tshuva that the poskim amanonganum and taka this klal b'chlal that you can have a kinyan situm to davar shalom b'laylam, and quotes some others that say that you can't say kimli. I hold like the ones who hold that it doesn't work. So the Har Tzvi concludes, for all these reasons, I think that there's no beis michush hanach lehem leYisrael. Now, this last point, especially of the Har Tzvi, is relevant even today. Someone sells a check to someone else. The minhag is not to make a separate shtar mechira on the check. I'm hereby selling you the check. You just pass the check off. So l'chayra, that's the same idea. Situmta, or even a Kolel Gaman today, if they want to sell the schos of the money that they're going to get, it's operating on the same concept. There are other practical ramifications for this nowadays. Right. A more risky purchase, right? So there are other practical contemporary ramifications. For example, there's an article by Rav Chaim Gedalia Tzimbalist, still with us, Shiur. So he had a question like this: someone owed money and he wanted to pay the debt. So how does he pay the debt? He wants to give the guy government bonds issued in his name. And the seder is that it's taka issued in your name, and you can't just transfer it, you can't actually legally transfer it to someone else's name. Alamai, the agreement was that the pile, when you're able to cash the bond, I'm going to give you the money. So it's the same kind of question, because the pile mamish, he lent the middle guy $100, he's going to get back $120. quotes from the Bris Yehuda, Bloy, who was Machmir. So in this case, you don't have to be Machmir because the Mamish has the person's name on the bond. But if it's symbolist, it's mitzayin to this discussion that there's such a concept of selling without a kinyan, transferring without a kinyan. So yeah, technically you can't legally transfer it, but there's still a concept in halacha where we agreed it's totally yours. So according to him, in his opinion, it will be fine for this reason, and he continues discussing it, but his maskana taka is lakula, not like Rav Bloy. I also found there's a halachic kaivetz from the Kolel and Bells, so they have a long article about also a seder you find tak in Kolel today, where you get a coupon. Let's say you get a 500 shekel coupon in a certain store, which often ends up happening. They get value in different ways. So would you be allowed to sell the coupon to someone else for slightly less because you don't want, you want cash. You don't want to buy from that store. So huge article going into this from Ala Zayten, and part of the discussion is it completely similar to the case in Har Tzvi? Because in the case of Har Tzvi, the Monim are taka on board. They agreed. They said, we fully acknowledge this concept. Mashenkin here, if it's officially only mamish the makbid, that's for the younger light only, and it's not really for other people, etc., etc. So that's the discussion there. And if you want to know the Maisa, you can look up the article to see. It depends on depends taka what the agreement, what the understanding is. One more thing in conclusion. There's an interesting thing from the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. You might have it. It's in Tzemach Tzedek, Piskei Dinim, Siman Kufay and Gimel. Another heter, another trick for Ribbis. So he says, Chavas Das, there's a trick that if Reuven wants to borrow Ribbis from Shimon, so Reuven and Levi issue shtaris for 120 to each other, canceling each other out. And then Reuven takes the shtar chayv that Levi kiviyachol owes him 120 and sells it to Shimon for 100. So Apoyel, Shimon paid 100, Lent paid 100 to Reuven, and he's to get back 120 supposedly from Levi, but really Reuven's just paying Levi and then Levi's paying Shimon. So it's all just a fictitious loan over there to get the Ribbis back around. So that's what the Chavas Das says. And the Tzemach says, this was a very common heter in that period of time in that place. And some say it only works if it's Kshachayev Le Be'emes. This is fake. So does it really work? He says, "V'shem Azmur," in the name of the Alter Rebbe, Higli of Pinchas, Shayamatzrich Gam Kein Kinyan. So, meaning that Levi has to talk about Mischayev. Otherwise, it seems silly. So you have to do things that make it at least that Levi's fully playing along legally that Hitaka owes the money. Ayin Shom, B'hamshech, all the different pratim, it goes back and forth, but that's a related case. Taka Siman Kuf Ayin Gimel that's discussed by the Tzemach Tzedek Kohen Alter Rebbe.
Put it on the note, do a whole long.